if I set aside specific time to concentrate on being creative or creating art, without necessarily, I'm not setting a schedule for myself, not saying I'm going to work on this painting here and this painting here, this painting here, but just setting aside a time, like, whether it's every week, every other week or whatever, just making sure that, you create time for that. I think that's very important because, like I said, it's just easy to let, you know, everyday life, cleaning the house, laundry, grocery store, all that stuff, just sort of take over and push that to the side. So yeah, do the work and make time for yourself to do the work.
There seems to be a mindset that everyone shares at Barter is that we want to be artistic, but other theaters and other artists tend to adopt this mystique of the artist. I'm an artist and you're not.
Yeah.
And I am this magical creative being.
Yeah.
We have to put that aside because of the amount of work we're doing. We have to put that aside. And yet, we still have this commitment to be artistic.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, but being creative and being artistic for me, like, it's work. Like, it's not, maybe some people, being creative just comes naturally to them. Like, it doesn't always come natural to me. Sometimes I have to, sit down and just force myself to draw out an idea and scrap an idea and start over. Like, sometimes, like, the idea that I have in my head, when I start drawing it, I realize how unsuccessful it is, and like that will lead me to, something else. Like, the act of just drawing something, even if it's wrong, will push me in a direction that, is towards something that is right.
So do you have any habits that you rely on? So you walk into the office, you get up in the morning, you walk into the design office. How does that go?
Again, it just depends on the show and um how directly I can connect to the show artistically. Like, some shows are harder than others to get that initial idea. And those shows, they start out as kind of a struggle, and sometimes I just have to get the crap out of the office. Like, sometimes those four walls, when you're stuck creatively, like, those four walls can feel like a little prison cell. Sometimes I just have to get out and walk around and think outside of that office. Like, so yeah, I don't necessarily think I have any habits, and I think that not having any habits is my habit. um I don't
So
know.
do you reinvent the wheel every?
No, I wouldn't quite go that far, but I mean, sometimes, like, if it's a show that speaks to me directly, I can go ahead and just start drawing stuff. Sometimes if it doesn't, I'll just have to do research, you know go online and look for images that speak to the director's vision and speak to how I interpreted the director's vision. And sometimes those can inform, which way to go. And a lot of times, when I have a show like that, like, I'll stockpile images, research images that, feel right to me for the show, and I'll just send those to the director. Like, hey, these are some images that sort of capture what I think the show wants to feel like, not necessarily wants to look like. Because I don't want to just take some image off the internet and try to recreate it. But at least gather images that capture the feeling of the show, and I'll send those to the director and get, his or her feedback on those. Like, sometimes, like, yes, that one is exactly how this show feels to me and not the rest. And so that's a good way to start sometimes, just to keep that collaborative process going, and to sort of figure out, a more clear direction before I put a lot of time and effort into something that doesn't jive with, where the show wants to go.
So it sounds like you have different reactions to because of different circumstances.
Right. Yeah.
The style of the play,
Oh man.
the director themselves,
Style, the director themselves.
time.
Um, no, no, not so much time. Audience expectation. That's something to consider also. We obviously want to create things that the audience will enjoy, and maybe spark new thoughts and new considerations in their mind. And then there's the precedent of quality. We don't ever want the quality of our art regress. It always wants to be progressive and moving forward. So yeah.
What about the space it's performed in?
Um, yeah, I mean that puts limitations, or not limitations, but it's just constraints that you have to work within. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have designed as many shows as I have for our two theaters, so um, I kind of know what those constraints are, so I don't necessarily have to consider that. It's kind of ingrained in my mind. The other consideration at Barter in particular is rep. All of these sets, for the most part, they all have to come apart and get stored backstage, and another set comes on and do that show, then it gets torn apart and stored. So designing shows that can be repped is another consideration that is kind of second nature to me at this point, seeing how probably 99% of the shows I've designed have had to rep.
Shows in repertory means the actors will perform one show one night and another show another night with a completely different set and full production values, and oftentimes it happens in the same day. You may have one show in the matinee and a completely different show in the evening, and you have to design a set that can be taken down and a new set put up in between a matinee and that evening show.
Yeah, and I would say probably 75% of that responsibility in terms of like how the set comes apart is up to the technical director. My 25% is designing something that's capable of happening with. But in terms of determining how it comes apart, that's mostly up to the technical director, and I'll give input too about, like, how I might see it happening, but really that's the technical director's responsibility, and area of expertise more so than mine.
Is that the same for a touring show? I mean, you got to take it apart, right?
Yeah, you gotta take it apart. You gotta put it in the truck. So yeah, technical director in that aspect is that, responsible for determining how it comes apart and then how it goes into the truck, like what order things go in. Yeah.
Do you have to consider the number of people that are deconstructing and reconstructing the set, or does the number of people who do it, is that dictated by your design? I mean, do you ever say, this is the design, and then it's up to Casper to say, okay, this is how many people it's going to take? Or does Casper come to you and say, okay, we got 5 people?
Not so much in rep, maybe with run crew, in terms of like number of people backstage running the show during the show. That probably influences me more so than the rep aspect of it. I mean, we have a great crew in terms of running the shows and in terms of repping the shows. So I imagine if I designed something completely some giant monstrosity that could not be repped, like, yeah, then I would have to reconsider. But I haven't had that situation yet. I don't think, not that I can remember. But really, more so for me, like I said, it's just the number of people backstage during the show that can, make all of these set pieces move and props, etc. Sometimes, there've been times where that has sort of influenced decisions, but that's okay. That's part of it.
Cool. Let's talk about Mary Poppins. That was an example of a show that was conceived. The conception didn't come to fruition, so you kind of pivoted and found a creative solution to the problem.
Right. Yeah.
So,
what else do you want to know? That's it.
well, what was the original conception of that? And why didn't it work? And what did you do?
The original concept was the Banks house was going to be, it was all based off of children's pop-up books. And the original concept was going to be that the house was going to start on stage collapsed with just the roof line, and that during the opening number the house was going to magically pop up like a pop-up book. It was all built that way. It was all, loaded in the theater for that to be the way that it was going to work. And this house also had to travel upstage downstage during the show, and it also had to rotate because it was built into three wedges. One wedge being the Banks house, another wedge being the children's bedroom, and then the third wedge kind of being a ubiquitous place that mostly served for the rooftops. But it was just kind of a ubiquitous space that could be used for many things. And when we first started talking about it, like I was obviously really excited about the idea of this pop-up house, and Rick was really excited about it. But I told him fairly early on that we would probably have to choose two out of the three. It could either pop up and spin, or it could pop up and move upstage downstage, or it could move upstage downstage and spin. But I don't know that we'll get all three. So we knew that going into it, that there was a possibility that this it was technically incredibly difficult to get it to do all three. And we ended up through a variety of circumstances that the pop-up function of the house is the one that didn't quite come to fruition, which is a bummer because that's the one that I was the most excited about.
And the thing with Barter is, in my experience, Barter, we try and figure out what went wrong, but we don't blame.
Right. Yeah.
So what happened? The reason why we try and figure out what went wrong is so we could learn from the mistake, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that necessarily anything happened. I think, like I said, we knew going into it that it was a technically very difficult set to pull off. One thing that happened that was outside of anybody's control was that our technical director at the time had some medical issues that kept him out of most of load in and most of tech. And he was the one who had probably 85 to 90% of the knowledge of how this thing was supposed to work. And so once we realized that we didn't have his expertise there, we kind of pivoted and like, okay, we just need to get this house stood up and be able to stand up on its own and just forget about the pop-up thing. And I think it still worked. It still worked very successfully for the show. Like that's probably the most I've ever worked during a tech of a show. There was at least 2 or 3 nights that I slept on the couch in the green room for like 30 minutes and got back up and went right back to work. I didn't leave the theater for 3 days.
Trying to get that set up.
Yeah, I was trying to get, that up. And then, once there's all kinds of little things that happen at the end of a load in that just didn't have a chance to happen during that load in because it was all about trying to figure out this giant monstrosity of a house. And so a lot of non-tech hours during tech week for me was just spent finishing up all the tiny little things that didn't have time to be addressed during load in of the set. And I think I actually have a model of that house somewhere in this room. Give me 1 second, I'll see if I can find it.
Okay.
So initially, this is the concept. This is a white model of the house, and this is sort of what it was going to look like at the top of the show. Bert was going to come out and walk along these rooftops and then fly out. And as he flew out, the original idea was that the house was going to rise like this. It takes a little bit of work to get it to stay up. So yeah, this is the Banks house.
Oh my God.
Go through those stairs and come around on the other side to the children's nursery. And then there was the third side, which was just kind of like a rooftop outside the house side. So that was the initial idea, was that it was going to pop up, spin, and then move up stage, down stage.
That would have been spectacular. And of
It would
course,
have been.
that's just a white model without any texture, color, or building materials.
Yeah, I'm still happy with how it turned out. Like I don't consider that one a failure. I just
But what did you learn from it?
um I don't know that I learned anything I didn't already know. I mean, like I said, I knew it was a stretch going into it. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things I learned is just how adaptable theater people are in general. Once we realized that that wasn't going to work, we had to restructure the entire tech process in order to be able to get everything rehearsed technically up before an audience would see the show. And we were able to get it done somehow, some way. We got it done.
Barter has a strong sense of community. In fact, we don't even call ourselves employees. We say barter family, barter people, you know. Many of the barter family actually become family and become life partners or get married and such. What do you think this strong sense of community does for your process and your commitment to your art?
Um, hmm. I mean, I think in large part, it's just it instills a strong feeling of trust, trust in your fellow employees, your colleagues, your directors. You know, trust that we all have um, the barter vision in our mind when we're doing whatever we're doing. You know, I can, if somebody comes to me and says that we can't do something, like I don't ever not trust that. Does that make sense?
Because
So
they share the same mindset.
right, right, and I don't, and in that respect, like, you know, being, you know, a family or a community, like um I don't feel any fear of failure. Like I don't fear like showing them an idea, and if they nix it, I don't take that personally. So really, it's just all about trusting each other throughout the entire process.
Kind of a safe place to if they say first is worst, it's a safe place to show your first so you can get on to the second
Yeah,
and third.
right.
I experienced the same thing. It was great to be able to come down out of my studio and just walk into your office and say, "Hey, Derek, I'm having a problem with this. How's this going to work?"
Yeah.
I wanted to address the constraints of tech. You know, we tech goes very fast. How many days do we normally have for tech?
Usually about what, two and a half,
Yeah.
two out of 12s, and then a 5 hour day.
And then before that, you have to load in. How many days do you normally have to load in a
Never enough.
full set that has to be repped?
Never enough. I'm trying to think. Usually 1 to 2 days. It usually takes a little bit more than that, so it usually ends up with scenery and electrics working over top of each other, and sound working over top of each other. There's usually
And
one,
sound.
yeah. There's usually like probably for a Gillum stage show, I'd say there's usually probably 2 days on the calendar set aside for loading in.
Do props load in at the same time?
No, they usually props usually load in last because usually most of their stuff they have in rehearsal and they need it up until the last minute. Like sometimes props doesn't get to load in until right before the first text starts.
And what about painting the floor? How often does that happen while you're trying to load in?
No, I mean we usually paint the floor for every show. Well, not every show, but every rep of shows. And there's usually like that usually happens the night before load in starts.
And for those people who don't know, by painting the floor, we mean sometimes it's painted black, but more often than not, it's painted in a texture or a design that will fit the scenic design, and that design is created by you.
Yeah, and usually the
So
floors have to work for two shows at least.
And so you have specific artisans or artists. It's not like somebody with a roller on a broom handle.
No, no,
Some of those designs are intricate.
yeah, particularly Smith Theater, the smaller theater where the audience is kind of, it's three-quarter thrust and the audience is above the stage. The floor treatments are probably a little bit more, I don't want to say they're not more important, but they're more visible to the audience than they are in Gillum stage. I mean, you almost have to be in the balcony there to even see the stage floor. I mean, if you're an orchestra level, I mean, you can maybe see a little bit of the floor, but not really a clear view of it. Um, so for those reasons, like floor treatments in Smith Theater are probably a little bit more. They're usually more detailed and a little bit. They're not more important. Like I said, they're just more visually apparent to the audience. In particular, like if you're on the sides in Smith Theater, like a lot of times, the floor is the majority of what you see in terms of the set, just because of the way the house is set up and the way the stage is set up.
And all this has to happen before tech rehearsals. And by the way, for people who don't know what tech rehearsals are, those are the actual rehearsals we have in the space when we implement all the technical elements like lights, sound, props. Actors learn to interact with the spatial dimensions of the set. They learn to interact with the furniture and, special props. Wait Until Dark. Amazing set. So part of the problem was you had to design a set where significant portions of the show was in complete darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Any special thoughts about how you did that?
Um, no, I mean that didn't really affect design so much of the set. I mean, it may have affected, like furniture placement and things like that.
Well, like, is the refrigerator furniture or is the refrigerator part of the set?
It's both. Yeah, so we had to put the fridge somewhere where, when it was open and emitting the fridge light, that it would, cast enough light on stage and be believable to the audience that, they were seeing things from just this fridge. And I think there was actually at least one moment where that was the actual only light on stage, was that fridge door light. The interesting thing about that show is trying to create a basement apartment on a theater stage. Like, it doesn't sound like it's that weird, but it's kind of weird thing to wrap your head around, of like, like typically the front doors are on stage level. That wasn't the only thing that I had to consider, but and designing this, I'm trying to remember where it was in New York. But anyway, like, it was 1940s basement apartment in New York.
Like a brownstone, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it was in Greenwich Village, but maybe it was in Greenwich Village. But designing a basement apartment that could be large enough to fill up our stage, but at the same time not look so giant and opulent to not be believable as a 1940s basement apartment. Not a lot, but that was a little bit of a challenge with that show, was again, making it large enough to fill our stage, but then small enough and intimate enough to be believable as this small little basement apartment.
Cool.
And the script kind of helps with that too, because it was in kind of almost a one room apartment. I mean, there was other rooms like bedrooms and stuff like that that were, off a hallway, but having the living room, kitchen, dining area all in one room helps, sort of confine that space in.
If you had any advice to give to somebody who wants to be more productive and still maintain their standards?
I mean, the obvious answer is just do the work, but that seems kind of a cop out.
It's not a cop out if it's the truth, because do the work is the effective strategy, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, I'm lucky enough to work for Barter, where my job is to be creative. It's in my own artwork, my own painting. It's easy to let uh, just everyday life sort of push that to the side. And I found that, I have, um, if I set aside specific time, to concentrate on being creative or creating art, without necessarily, I'm not setting a schedule for myself, not saying I'm going to work on this painting here and this painting here, this painting here, but just setting aside a time, like, whether it's every week, every other week or whatever, just making sure that, you create time for that. I think that's very important because, like I said, it's just easy to let, you know, everyday life, cleaning the house, laundry, grocery store, all that stuff, just sort of take over and push that to the side. So yeah, do the work and make time for yourself to do the work.
Good advice.